Recording in progress.
Waiting for the thumb.
Good morning. This is the meeting of the Downtown Facility Special Committee. It's Tuesday, July 9th. It is 9:03 a.m. and we're calling this meeting to order. In chambers, we have Mike Lane, Veronica Pillar, Annie Corman, Susan Curry, Deborah Dawson, and Greg Mezzi has been excused, and we'll see if Rich makes it. Are there any changes to the agenda? Anybody don't have any? Any comments from the public, Jordan? Okay, moving right along. The only report that I wanted to talk about was the green building construction and renovation policy. This is because the project is new construction over $500,000, and we need to, the policy's been in place for I think about 10 years, and we're going to follow that policy, but we are going to review it for anybody who has any questions on it. And there is a copy in the packet. But the reason this is brought forward is because of our discussion about the number of people on a review committee for this project. And it's good it was laid out, and it lays out pretty clearly who the building project team is. And I'll read the paragraph that is dealing with us. And what it says, the building project team will consist of staff members from the county administration, the facilities department, the Department of Planning and Sustainability, the recycling and materials management department, external experts, and other department staff as needed. This discussion came up because of the desire of more than 4 legislatures who wanted to be on this review committee. So I just want to open this up to discussion, maybe let Lisa talk about this just a little bit, why it's the way it is, and then we'll talk.
Sure. So maybe it would be helpful if I could lay out the kind of process and timeline that we were thinking of, and outlining the opportunities for legislature involvement and ultimate decision-making and policy-making. But per the policy and outlining the staff that would be involved in this project, it pretty clearly outlines, and we have identified 7 staff members by definition from that policy, including myself and Norma Jane from County Administration, Katie from Planning, Leo, the Director of Recycling Materials Management, Terry Carroll as the Chief Sustainability Officer, and in this case, Megan McDonald, due to her background with historic preservation and the importance of that to this project. So once we receive, and today is the due date, so we may still be receiving responses to the RFQ. Once those proposals are received, committee members had expressed an interest in having those shared. So those would be shared with committee members of the downtown facilities and also the project review team. I haven't spoken with Arel, so I don't know how many proposals we have so far, but based on the number of people that downloaded the RFQ early on, we thought that it could be quite high, 20 or so. We thought that I plan to utilize the building project team to do the initial review and scoring of those applications according to a rubric to narrow it down to 4 finalists to come in and provide in-person presentations. And that rubric and scoring would be based on the elements identified as priority areas in the RFQ. And so we would complete that initial review of proposals by early August, and then we would invite 4 finalists to provide 1-hour presentations toward the end of August, and invite the legislature, the committee participants to take part in those finalist interviews along with the 7-member staff committee, and with the ultimate goal of choosing 1 finalist to recommend to the Downtown Facilities Committee and the full legislature in September. And that finalist could be asked or brought in to provide further presentation to the group, either the Downtown Facilities Committee or the full legislature. So that was the process that I'd outlined. I think it's important for the county to have professional staff leading the process and able to speak to the elements of the RFQ according to a scoring rubric, certainly with participation from legislators, and inviting legislators into that piece of the process, but ultimately providing a recommendation to the committee for consideration and further questioning, and to either accept or not accept the advice or the recommendation of staff. So that's kind of the process that we've laid out, and I believe the process that has taken place previously with other building projects.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for laying that out in writing as well, which I greatly appreciate. Just before I open this up to questions, Susan and I discussed this, and we're going to limit the number of legislators from this committee to 4 that are part of that review committee when the time comes, and then there's more people that are interested in that than 4, but we're going to keep it to 4, so we don't have to worry about executive session stuff and having a quorum. But anyway, so questions? Go ahead, Deborah.
Well, I appreciate why you want to limit it to 4. I was just curious to know whether after staff whittles it down to the 4 finalists, if those interviews would be closed to other legislators who might want to just sit in and listen to them.
My thought is that anybody can be part of the review, and also, if we do get 20 people submitting those, that every legislature should have the opportunity to look at all of them. It's just that the committee is going to, the project team is going to score them.
No, I understand that, because the project team knows enough about this to make informed decisions about scoring, and we don't. I just wondered if, when you have these interviews with, say, the 4 finalists, and I understand that only the 4 people that you want to put on this review committee would be sitting in on those and making decisions, but would any legislator who was interested in hearing it be allowed to be present?
I believe so. Is there any concerns with that? They wouldn't be voting people, obviously.
No, we would be flies on the wall.
Microphone. I think in that instance, it may be preferable to have 1 or more special meetings and do those interviews in executive session, because at that point you would have a quorum of the committee present.
Even though those people aren't voting, if only 4 people vote?
If there is a quorum present to conduct public business and carry out the governmental function of interviewing these finalists, the answer, I mean, you could make the argument, but I think
To be safe.
to be safe, it makes sense
Okay.
to do that in executive session.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions on this? Mike?
Yeah, let me start by saying that when I voted for the green building construction and renovation policy, I certainly had no intention of delegating all of the construction to this committee that's mentioned there. I certainly wanted to see the advice on the green construction because it's pretty important. But to substitute that for a project of maybe $60 million by the time we get done, we need to have legislators there from the beginning. We always have on our building projects. When we had, did the library, we had a construction committee with legislators. When we did when we looked at the sale of the old library, we had legislators reviewing the RFQs and doing the interviews along with staff. I don't mean to discount the staff, that's pretty important, but I think it's important that we look at this project as a county legislature project and that we just don't say, come back and we'll rubber stamp it for you. It's got to be, we've got to be in there from at the ground floor and work up to develop the buy-in by the whole legislature.
I have another question on process. So this project team comes up with 4 finalists, if that's the number. Maybe there's 5, maybe there's 3, I don't know. But would those people all be submitting those finalists? Would they come and present to this entire committee here? And then we would vote on it to go to the full legislature? How does that work?
What I was proposing in consultation with Arel was that the project team of staff and the legislators that are participating view those presentations and rank according to the rubric to whittle it down to 1, to make a recommendation to this committee and then the full legislature.
Anybody have any comments on that? Rich?
Yeah, my antenna go up when I hear the word rubric. It's gotten us into controversy before. I assume that if some sort of scoring system is developed, as you say, that would be shared with the committee and we'd have an opportunity to comment on that, and it would be explained.
The rubric would be based on the elements.
Can we call it something else? The scoring system? Please.
Scoring criteria.
Thank you.
Based on the priorities set forth in the RFP, which were discussed at length in this committee and come upon by consensus of the committee as the important priorities of the county for this project. And so I think that, and I would look to Lori in terms of our procurement. The way we go about procurement is that we have to score and rank according to certain criteria and keep it out of a political process. I think that having established priorities will protect the county, and having professional staff who are familiar with those elements, more familiar than myself, though I'm familiar with some of them, but having the group of people around the table looking at it through that professional lens and able to provide their recommendation will protect the county against any real or perceived political bias or influence in the process.
To be clear, I agree with what you're saying. What I don't want to have happen is that it's sort of a black box where suddenly a recommendation pops out and it's like, well, that's what the recommendation said, and you don't even know who made the decision. So we need to be open to the public on that. Yeah. Sure,
and I think that that's what we've done with other RFPs in terms of the scoring matrix or criteria, that they are kept on file in the finance department if a question were ever to come up of impropriety, or if one contractor's development team is chosen over another, we have a record as to why. And it's important that we have this discussion because this is the first of several projects where we're going to be having to follow a process. There's this project, potential emergency shelter, the public safety building. So this is not a one-off. We're heading into this territory quite heavily in the coming years.
Veronica?
I guess on this point, would it make sense for the legislators to be able to not develop, but just see the scoring system, like the blank scoring system, but not the actual scores assigned to the applicants?
Sure.
I don't know. We could all, is that related to what Lisa just said? I was just interested in the system.
Deborah?
Yeah, I've been away for a while, so I'm viewing this sort of from halfway in and halfway out. And I understand, for example, that, Mike, you're a consistent, staunch defender of legislative prerogatives. But I also understand that the reason we have professional staff is because they know stuff we don't know. And I'm trying to figure out, I think what we're all discussing and trying to figure out is how to balance those two interests in this process. So I'm curious to know at what stage the legislature really needs to be involved. My sense is that we don't have the expertise to be involved in applying any scoring criteria that we all agree to the RFPs that get submitted. Is that what I'm hearing from you, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm not knocking anyone's around the table expertise because some may have them, but it is the role of staff and it's something that staff are used to doing in terms of RFP selection.
Okay, so if that's the initial, it seems to me that the legislature should have input into what the scoring criteria are, which is Veronica's point. The staff has the expertise to apply those on a preliminary basis to the RFPs that we receive. So then the question becomes, at which stage does this committee, as the representatives of the legislative prerogative, get involved in making the choices? And I guess the question is, should that be with a subset of 4 of us, or should that be with the entire committee? And if it's the entire committee, does it need to be an executive session because it's a contract matter? I think that that's the stage at which we need to figure out when we, as legislators, jump in to exercise the prerogatives that Mike wants to defend.
Go ahead, Liz.
So, and this has been, under a little bit of consideration these last few days. I put forth this proposed process because I think even when we still have 4 finalists, there's some room for discretion, and we're still needing to apply the criteria. And if it becomes the committee's decision at that point, or if it becomes part of the committee deliberation in executive session, it is the committee that is directing the legislature that is directing the process to recommend the finalist to itself, and the staff are not making that recommendation. I think it's a cleaner process because if to have it directed by staff, because the ultimate authority for that recommendation with legislator participation in that process for legislators, a quorum of this committee, then it is the recommendation of the staff, which can then be accepted, rejected, or questioned by the committee and sent back if it's not acceptable. But I think once it becomes the committee's work, then it becomes part of a potentially political process. It's not a recommendation by the staff for consideration.
Yes, Mike?
We're elected officials, and that's our job, to represent our constituents and represent the people of the county. And to totally delegate this to staff is not, in my opinion, the way it ought to happen. And we've never done that before. We've always had a collaborative process with staff. We had wonderful staff that's done great jobs for us. But remember, another thing to remember, this is an RFQ. It's not an RFP at this point. We're looking for qualifications of a potential person or persons that will bring forth a project for us if we choose to have them. But to say that the legislators are going to be political because they're listening to community input, for example, is not improper.
Go ahead, Rich.
I think I agree with Mike on this. I think it's okay to have legislators involved. I don't see that we need that clear a line. I think legislators have to behave, and we're capable of it at times.
All evidence to the contrary.
Sometimes we don't.
I think as elected officials, it's our job to represent our constituents' desires and steering the policy, like making the policy decisions for this county, such as reviewing and approving the green building policy and determining what we would like to see in a firm. So I guess the sorts of, I forget what word you used earlier, but I am so sorry, I haven't had enough coffee. What is it that we're looking for in a firm, and the things we value, the criteria we want to see, that I think is our job to develop. And I don't know that it would be our job to review a scoring system based on that, but maybe, or to look at it and be like, yeah, this way you're evaluating reflects the policy choices we want to see. But as to the application of that to the specific applicants, I don't think, my constituents can shout at me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they collectively have preferences about you should hire this firm over that one, or the nitty-gritty of applying things, but they'll have preferences things like, oh, you should try to hire minority-owned businesses, or hire a firm that, I don't know, knows what it's doing, cares about things more than making money, has experience with sustainable architecture, that kind of thing. And so on that level, I think it makes sense for legislators to be involved, and I think a lot of that has already been done, right, in the building process, but not necessarily in the nitty-gritty application. But also, we talked about people have different experiences around the table. I have no experience in.
Me neither.
So in hiring people to construct buildings, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But that's maybe an argument for me not to be involved.
Annie, and then Deborah.
Yeah, I think for my thinking for the RFQ and the RFP is that I think the experts, which are our staff that we've hired, should be doing the scoring. Mm-hmm. If similar to other things like the Community Housing Development Fund. If there's, certain ones that rise to the top, and I think we should be open to them saying to us, okay, we've come up with 2 that are pretty close, then they're going to hand them off to us, and they explain why, and they can show us the scoring. And we could see the scoring, I think, either way, even if they're recommending, say, 1. But my guess is, it's going to boil up to the top of which ones, and then we make the decision. But I really don't think we have, the expertise. And even if we did, I mean, how we're going to figure out who has the expertise and not. We have staff for that. And so I would rather just see the staff do all the not the rubric, but the scoring and to rate that. And also, it was mentioned, political stuff. I mean, we are politicians, so, I think, I'm assuming, and you can correct me, Lisa, I'm thinking you're saying that it could be seen as a politically motivated or, more of a political process versus, more of a professional, not political process. Our staff is not, politically motivated. They're not pushed by individual, whatever motivations we might have. And of course, we all, I hope and I do believe that we all come here with pure intentions to represent our constituents. But I think there's going to be possibly less perception or greater confidence in our community if we let the professional staff do their work. So I'd be more inclined to see that process again similar, and we could, if folks aren't familiar with that, for instance, how we have done with the Community Housing Development Fund or other processes that we've gone through with grants. I think, for instance, the community, what was the other whole bunch of money we gave out?
Community Recovery Fund. Community
Recovery Fund. Thank you. I haven't had any coffee yet today. So I think with that one, there was some perception that it was political. I'm not saying that's correct or not, but I'm just saying for something like this that, that's this amount of money and this important to the community, I'd like to leave it more with the staff whenever possible. Thank you.
I'm going to let Lisa jump in, then Deborah.
I just wanted to maybe clarify or put a finer point on my previous remarks, and I didn't in any way mean to diminish or disparage the role of the legislature in working with staff, because I do think that we enjoy a collaborative working relationship, nor would I want your jobs. I think that they're difficult. And
they don't pay very well either.
And I do very much value the role of legislators in this process and in the review of the applicants. So this process and timeline was laid out in consultation with a REL after having done previous building projects in the county in collaboration with the legislature. And so I think that I tend to agree with Mike in that legislature involvement early on is what we're looking for here. In those projects, it was my understanding that there were 2 legislators involved in a committee with staff, that it was not done by committee. So this process was designed based on the previous projects and processes that were followed at that time. So this is not a change. It's following our green buildings policy, but it's not a substantive change from what was done in the past.
Thank you. Deborah?
Yeah, I think, to me, the best analogy to apply here is when we hire a direct report, we have HR that looks at the applications and compares them to the criteria in the job description and presents us with the people who meet those requirements. And then we a selection committee interviews the candidates, and we pick the best one. And I don't think that this should be a very different process. If we have staff doing the initial scoring according to the criteria that we as a legislator have decided are important to us, they've done their part in selecting only candidates that meet our requirements and are qualified. If we then, as a legislative committee or a legislature as a whole, decide amongst those candidates, you can say, oh, you've made a politically motivated decision, but the fact of the matter is that any decision you make is going to yield a qualified candidate. I don't see how we could be critiqued for doing that. And I also want to say that I think the difference between professional staff and elected officials is that if something goes, I'm trying to think of a proper term, belly up with this selection, we're the ones who are going to be held accountable for that. I mean, we're the ones whose names are on the plaques. I guess the two-step process that I would feel inclined to support is what I think Mike and Rich are suggesting, which is that y'all do that initial scoring. And when you determine, you being staff, determine that these are the 3 or 4 or 5 applicants who meet the criteria and are qualified, then it's up to this committee to interview those people, make a determination and a recommendation to the full legislature.
I was just trying to remember, I think it was 8 or 9 years ago that as director of the library, there was a similar process for the complete renovation of the interior of the library. And just my experience is that we did delegate, the staff did exactly what you're saying, Deborah. But that whole process was so smooth because it was such a good collaboration between the legislature and the staff. And I would like to see us do that again.
I'm comfortable with the staff doing the scoring, but I think obviously it needs to be shared with everybody so they understand what that scoring was and how you got to where you came up with the finalist. But I have a process question. So I think this is really about process, as Lisa mentioned, and so this committee has 8 people on it, which is really a quorum of the whole legislature, right? In theory. So that's an issue for us. So for these, if this comes before this committee, and we're voting for the whole legislature if we vote, right? So that's a concern for me how that works. So but my question is a process. So let's say we come up with 4 finalists, and should those finalists, and that's when we add in the 4 legislators that we're talking about after you do your scoring, because the legislatures, these 4 legislators aren't doing any of the scoring, correct? Right? And shouldn't. But I'm wondering if that's the right way to do it. And maybe narrowing it down to 1 finalist is not where it should go. So maybe it should be narrowed down from this, from the staff and from the 4 legislature, we should narrow it down to a few, because at some point, the full legislature needs to vote. And the request for qualifications is the one issue, really. What's the request for proposals, right? So we're going to select somebody to move forward with, it's not just qualifications, but we want to know, what are you proposing, right? Does that go before the full legislature? And do they come into those finalists that we pick? Maybe there's 1, maybe there's 3, maybe there's 2. Do they come before the whole legislature and present their proposals? So I just don't know how I don't know how this worked in the past, so I'm just curious how, and this is important because you're going to be dealing with this again, so.
Aurel, maybe more versed to address the RFP versus RFQ, but I think that we chose an RFQ process for this because it could lead to more of an open playing field for people to propose different approaches to what we're trying to achieve. Is that correct, Aurel?
Yes.
So I don't know that there would be an RFP, a separate RFP process in addition to this RFQ.
Correct.
Let me step in. My question is maybe once the finalists are revealed, should we have a special legislature meeting and those presentations made to the full legislature? So I'm trying to understand involvement.
I think if I could address one process concern that I have in this, and maybe the term that I used becomes a political process was the wrong term. The majority rule voting and by the legislature to choose a contractor in this process, I understand it would lead to that. What I guess in the process that I'm thinking of, as we narrow down to finalist candidates and we are learning more through the interview process, staff is also learning more. So for instance, if Aurel, as an engineer, learns something about a candidate that makes them not qualified to move forward, but they are a favorite among the legislators, it is, I know that you will hear those concerns, but ultimately it is the decision of the legislature at that point, and that would not be the recommendation of the staff. So that's, I guess, my concern in the process.
But how would that person survive the scoring process? If Aurel discovers that someone's not qualified for some technical engineering reason, I would assume that that person would not get through the scoring process to the legislature.
The initial scoring process is based on the paper applications. So we can learn so much through the paper applications. The next stage is a presentation and back and forth interview where more information is gathered. So there's often more to be revealed in a second stage interview.
Okay.
I have a question on that process. So after you score it, would the staff, without the legislators involved, would they be doing a little follow-up and calling to get clarification on the RFQs and those types of things before it was provided to the whole committee? So, if you get all these things, you're going to have to do some homework before you even score, I would think. Would that be the way that works?
There's a process of reference checking that staff would do as part of probably somewhere after the interview round.
Aurel, I jumped in. I'm going to let you dive in feet first.
Okay. This has been great discussion. Yes, so we, as of half an hour ago, 84 firms have downloaded the RFQ. Just a quick review, probably 20% of those are not consultants, they're just contractors, vendors, and such. I hope we don't get 60-some, because then there's no way we're going to be ready by August to interview. My hope is we get around 10, and we would whittle that down. Just some background, the last project, large construction project, because we've done other types of projects where we've done RFQs, but the last construction project was for the health department, and it was not a new building. That was an entire gut of the building. That had a subcommittee of the construction committee of 6 individuals, 2 legislators. Mike Lane was one of them. Frank Prota was the other one. Alice Cole was the director. Brenda was the deputy at the time. Myself, and then John Lampman. So there were 6 of us, and we basically did the same process, reviewed requests for qualifications were submitted. I think we had around 6 or 7, and so I went through the initial process of first vetting those to make sure that they submitted everything that they were supposed to submit. As you know, there was a long list of required submittals, many forms that were required, so we go through that process initially. And then like where they're located, firm size, if they showed past projects of this size. This one we would ask for, we've asked for experience with historic preservation and SHPO, so we'd make sure that was they're showing that they have a team that has either MWBE, DBE, or SDVOBs in them. So I go through that initial one, and then those are shared with the committee with the evaluation form, not the rubric, but I call it evaluation form. That in the RFQ, we listed those things that we feel are important as we select consultants. And so I may do some calling, but everything should be there. If they are prepared and we want them on a project like this, they need to be following the directions and making sure they have everything in there. So it's rare that I would reach out for additional information, because technically they should have submitted it. And it's only if it's a typo, a phone number, or something that I may reach out. But everything should be there to allow us to do that kind of preliminary screening. And so this project team would then review the RFQs, and hopefully we have probably 10 to 15. I think many of those that have downloaded are just curious. I reached out randomly to several last week. Only one returned my call. Others I've talked to since. So I know of 3 that will be submitting. Beyond that, I don't know that. And many consultants use that to develop teams. So there may be a sub-consultant that downloaded it that is going to team up with a larger firm to do either landscape architecture, or if they're a MWBE, says, I'm an MWBE, I'd like to team up with your firm. And so that's going on. I'm aware of one group that has probably 4 to 5 team members already. So I see that happening. And so in as we evaluate the proposals, each individual in the team would score it, and then we would rank them, and then come up with 3 to 4 that we would then intend to interview, and those we would share with the committee, how we're ranking them, and then we would interview them. About an hour interview with each consultant, either in 1 day or over 2 days, and what we've requested is that they bring the team. So not just the marketing person that's going to give us a glitzy presentation, but actually the project manager, who is the principal in charge, some of the main people in the team that we want present. So after that, we then evaluate those consultants as far as the interview, how they did there, because reviewing paper applications is one thing. When you meet them in person, it's another, because I think it's important for me and others that will be working directly with them on a day-to-day basis, that we feel that we can work well with them. There are architectural firms that basically this is a cookie cutter design and this is what they're going to, push down on us. And we don't want that. I've had firms that listen to us because if you know, and I'm an engineer, so I know that some engineers say, no, this is the way we're going to do it. Others are much more open to suggestions from the owners. So we look at those types of things and then we evaluate them and then we would rank them as well because it's an RFQ process, so 1 to 4, let's say, because what we would be presenting to the committee would be our recommendation for the consultant that we would recommend entering into negotiations for the fees. So at this point, we're not talking numbers, we're just talking their qualifications. So we make that recommendation, and our hope is that the committee and as well as the legislature would agree to us then continuing to negotiating the fees with them. So then that's the second process. An RFP does not need to go out. The RFQ covers all of that. That's why all of these forms are required so that we could go into that next step. We would negotiate with the top consultant, and if we reach an agreeable and reasonable fee, because we'd also have to go over the scope of work. There are several things that are unique to this project that we would have to include, and so they would provide us a fee for that. If we feel the fee is not reasonable and we cannot negotiate it down, then we would then go to the next, the second ranked consultant. We've never had to do that. We've always been successful in negotiating with the top-ranked consultant. And at that point, then we make a recommendation that we award the contract to this firm or consultant team, and that would be approved by this committee as well as by the legislature, and then we would get going with design.
Okay, regarding the green building policy, do all the legislatures here agree that the scoring should be done by the staff and the legislatures will not be involved in that? We all comfortable with that, as the policy is written?
Yes, I am.
Everybody good with that? Okay, so
Yes.
scratch that one anyways, right? As it should have been. So I appreciate your comments on that. I guess So let's say you come up with that scoring, it's all done, it's shared with this committee, and there's 4 finalists. Then this committee plus 4 legislators would be part of these presentations from these 4 finalists. Is that how that works?
No, the project team that includes I think 4 legislators from this group would be part of that interview team.
After the scoring?
After the initial scoring is just to get down to a short list.
Right.
But then when we go into the interviews, those 4 legislators are part of that project team, and they would rank those
4
or
whoever.
Consultants, and that would then be shared with the full committee.
With this committee?
Correct.
And it would be up to this committee to then vote to go to the full legislature?
No, we would from this project team, which is a subset of this committee, which would include 4 legislators, we would recommend from that interview 1 consultant to then go into negotiations with. We would share that recommendation with this committee. Now, all along, you will all have copies of their RFQs packets. And I requested hard copies as well. Those of you that want hard copies, let us know. We will also all share electronic copies of those proposals. So you will have the opportunity to review all of the proposals if you want. You won't be ranking them, but at least those 4 will be ranking, or at least not the legislators, but the staff will be whittling it down to the short list, which will then be the 4 consultants that will be presenting to this group, which includes 4 legislators. We would then make a recommendation as this subgroup to this committee of the 1 consultant team to go into negotiations with.
Okay, now, again, this is a process question as well. Thanks for that. So let's say that happens, and the 4 legislatures in this committee make a recommendation. This committee can't vote on that. There's 8 of us, right? Doesn't it have to go to the full legislature? I'm trying to Because this is a quorum. 8 people is a quorum of the full legislature, right?
But
I'm just trying to understand how this works.
But these are public meetings.
Right. I mean, if it's the full legislature's decision in the end, it kind of compresses down. Whether it's a special meeting of this committee or a special meeting of the legislature, and whether it's in executive session or not, those are decisions that can be made, because you can make arguments. You can make arguments each way. I would suggest the most important thing is to settle on the process that you want, and then we'll make it comply with the open meetings law.
That sounds good. Thanks, Maury. Mike?
I would equate it to a committee of the whole, where you can go, the whole group can go into a committee, but after you take the action in the committee, it still has to go back to the full group for a vote.
it shouldn't be any different than anything else we do.
I was just curious about quorum. I'm not sure where that fits, so yeah. Go ahead, Deborah.
I guess the one concern I have about this is, given the process that you've described, the staff and these 4 legislators will come to this committee with one recommendation that we can either vote thumbs up or thumbs down, and we don't necessarily have the information and leeway to say, why didn't you choose this other one? I would prefer this other one, for example. And I guess that's where the concerns that Mike and Rich and I have expressed lie. I don't understand why, if y'all come up with 4 through the scoring process and some sort of initial interview, why those 4, or at least the ones that don't disqualify themselves in that process, why all of them can't be presented to this committee for consideration.
I agree with that, but I'm not sure. It would have to be an executive session. Would that be correct, Maury?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
It really depends. I mean, it's very much analogous to the question of appointment of direct report to the staff. So it's something that involves the appointment of a person, persons, or corporation. The open meeting law refers to appointment of corporations to a position. So, so it could be, is it mandatory that it be in executive session? No, because in the, as compared with appointment of an individual to a position, there's not likely to be the same level of confidentiality required. So if the legislature or the committee were to conclude that it should have public interviews of the finalists, it could do that.
Rich and then Annie.
If you could say that again, if we wanted to hold an executive session, if some of the committee members said, I'd really like to talk about candidates 2 and 3, can we do that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm open to this. I'm fine with what you propose, with the proviso that if we get to that point, there's one recommendation and some of the committee members are saying, I'd really like to understand this better, we'll hold an executive session and we'll have the full and frank discussion there. So I'm okay proceeding on this basis.
Of just one recommendation?
We get one recommendation, but if some of the committee members are saying, I really want to understand why you didn't pick 3, number 3.
But do we have a basis for that, is my question.
Well, we're all going to get, I think as Arel said, we all get 67 copies of all the applications in hard copy.
But we aren't present for interviews. We don't see the people. We don't hear the answers to the
What I'm going to
question.
do is I'm going to trust the 4 legislators that are selected to participate. And it's not ideal, but I'm okay with that.
Thank you, Rich. Annie?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a choice between having it being narrowed down to, say, one, where at the point where it gets submitted to, the recommendations get submitted to this committee, or is there another choice of getting it narrowed down to 2 or 3? So I'm wondering if that's part of what we're talking about. And then I also wanted to mention, which I didn't realize, so I appreciate all the discussion, that once, so this, we're not going to have a separate RFP process, request for proposals, because what we're doing now is based on the qualifications with these firms. We're going to pick the one most qualified to then give us probably a couple of proposals for a center of government, and then we're going to pick from there. Is that, no?
They'll submit one proposal, fee proposal. So basically, once we select from those 4, let's say, we select one consultant to negotiate with, we would then go through the scope of services. We've listed them here, but there may be things that have changed over the last month, let's say, that we may want to say, okay, we want you to be more involved in the, like with SHPO. We had it in there, but at the time, the buildings were considered non-contributing. Now they're considered contributing. So that's going to be a slightly higher level of involvement. So we're going to put that in there. So once it's clear what the scope of service that they're going to be proposing on, then they submit a fee proposal, which we review. And I may say, no, why is this so high? I think it should be lower. And typically, we've been successful in negotiating the fees. And then once we have a fee, then we would bring it back to committee and say, okay, for doing the center of government, this is the total cost for the project, and that would then be approved.
But is this firm that we're talking about now, going through this process, the firm that ultimately comes through, is that the same firm that's going to give us plans or the scope for the center of government to actually build it, right?
Yes.
So at some point later on, they are going to give us one or more designs for a center of government with the fees to build that. We're not going to decide that sooner. We're going to decide that later. We're going to in the process with that firm. Right?
Right, and so that's further along in the design process through the initial preliminary schematic design. We may have a couple of options that we would then share with this committee as far as which route to take. And then once we select that design, then they go through schematic design development. We would then get a cost estimate for the construction. So that's a separate number, or discussion in the process. This initial one is just their fee proposal to do the design based on the listed scope of services.
Just wanted to lay it all out, so at least for me, maybe it's already clear to other folks, but I just want to make sure we're clear on the on the process, which is why we're not going to have a separate RFP later, and why it really is really important, that this part of the process, why for me and for other people, it's really important that we figure out this part as best we can.
Okay, just to put this part to bed, so Susan and I are going to be on this review committee, as well as Mike Lane and Ian Corman. Those are the 4 that we've selected. And I'm looking forward to working with you guys and the staff on that. It's not to say we may not come down to 2 finalists, right? So at that point, and part of this too is it's the timing. I mean, Lisa put a timeline on that's pretty tough with all their budget season and whatnot. And when we're having hour-long interviews with these finalists, it's tough to do in a committee like this. So it just doesn't make sense, or even to the legislatures. It's not to say that the full legislature couldn't be presented with 2 people at some point, but it may just be 1. And Rich, thanks for your confidence in that. But are there any more comments on this process that I missed? Any?
Do we know when the time period is? Because I might have to go out of town, or can we have an alternate for me, or for this process, just in case it gets scheduled at a certain time where one of the four of us can't do it? I've heard other people are interested.
The alternate will be Greg Mezzi.
Okay.
I mean, what would resolve a lot of this would be we just get 4 responses. We don't have to go through, that's, I hope, but I don't know. That would make it much easier. But then, I mean, in the past, my experiences, it's been pretty clear that one group really stood out from the rest. If not in the evaluation process, at least for the interview team, we would include criteria for a tiebreaker. If there are 2 that we feel are really close, what would be the tiebreaker? And one could be they have a higher percentage of NWBE, could be that they're a local firm, it could be that they, even their headquarters is a sustainable building, that their own building. So those are things that we would develop with the interview team for a tiebreaker. We've not had that, but most times one really stands out among the rest.
Lisa?
To answer Annie's question on timeline, we were looking at calendars and vacations and budget calendar and so forth, and we were considering between August 22nd and 28th to be holding those interviews.
Okay, that'll work for me. Thank you.
And will the scoring be complete by our next meeting of this committee?
We had that on the timeline as well, I'm trying to remember. It should be. The proposals are due at 2 today.
You said
And so
August
I'll let Lisa
6th.
know. I mean, depending on the quantity, that may extend that initial review process. If it's a short, it would be pretty quick.
The answer, the projected answer is yes, because we wanted to get through the initial scoring and then allow time to schedule with the finalist candidates, give them sufficient time to schedule the interviews. So we'd hope to have those done by August 6th, and our next committee meeting is August 13th.
Okay, thank you for that. I know it's a tough timeline and a lot going on there, but Deborah?
I would just be curious when they come in, if you would let us know how many we actually got. I'm just
I think
pruriently
it's
interested.
at 2, and I know I have a Zoom link for it, but I don't think that's available to all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there any more discussion on this? Great. Lisa, do you feel that we move forward a little bit?
Thank you.
Okay, all right, great. So we already talked to the request for qualification center of government building. So next discussion was an access and parking study for center of government building. And I wanted to open this up, and we talked about this at the last meeting, if we should be contracting with somebody to do this study for us outside of this process. So that was my thought, that we should be doing RFQs for this separately for this parking and access study. But I don't know, that was just my thought. And Deborah, go ahead.
I had a question. I was not here last month, and I'm sorry, so I didn't hear the discussion that you all had about the input that we got from the State Historic Preservation Office. But my question, I guess, is unless and until that issue gets resolved, do we even know for sure that we're building a center of government downtown, and how do we do a parking study when we don't know if we're going to need it and where we're going to need it?
Megan, do you want to jump up?
So regarding that, I think the main takeaway from our latest interaction with the SHPO is that we really need the design team on board, because once we have that design team on board, we can look at the alternatives and, kind of move forward with consultation with our office. And so, yes, we know that they consider these buildings contributing, and so we're going to need to look at what our options are. But they recognize that normally doesn't happen until you have your design team on board who can professionally look at what are your programmatic needs, what are the historic resources, what are the different alternatives to kind of meet what the need of our building program is and balance it with the historic resources and which alternatives are feasible. So I don't think their message to us was that our project doesn't go forward. I think it's not, there's no decision yet in terms of is demolition appropriate in this case? Is incorporating parts of the buildings, appropriate? Reusing buildings, all of the different kind of flavors of alternatives, but we need the design team to bring that professional expertise to that consultation process.
So how do you do a parking study when you're basically trying to nail a custard pie to the wall?
I think that would be more about what we're seeing as, what we want this building to include, the departments, the number of staff, what we see as the public services that are there. So, but it likely would make sense for, if the design team isn't the consultant doing that study, for them to at least be intermeshed with that study, because the building will impact, what's in the building is going to impact who's going to need the parking. So I think those two things do go together.
My thought on that is that we've talked about the departments are going to be going into the center of government building, and that could change. We don't really understand how many constituents or public people are visiting these facilities, so we need that information because we have to have, that's an access issue for us. Parking is also an issue not only for the public, but also for the new departments that will be coming here. There's quite a few that do have access to that. And so if you don't understand how many public contacts are coming on a daily basis, how are we going to know how much space we need for them to build the building? I mean, so that was my thought process, and maybe it is with the consultant, and they handle that whole process. I was just trying to move the process along a little bit, so.
Yeah, well, if I may, given what Megan said, it sounds like this study should be one of the first things that our consultant does once we've decided who that is through the RFQ process, right?
I mean, it could be. I think it would be wise to include it in the scope of services that we would negotiate to do this, because they're going to be working with every department involved in the center of government, but also they're going to be looking at this building and the old jail, because we're going to do some renovations after we move those departments out for those that are going into the old jail and those departments that are staying here or coming into this building. So they will be working with every department and knowing their public parking needs as well as staffing parking needs. So I think it makes sense. I think it is. I think the study will not take a long time, but I think it's important first that we make sure we have a viable project before we spend additional money doing this study. And there's going to be ample time. We're not going to start construction for about 2 years anyway. So we have ample time. But my recommendation is that we would incorporate this study with the successful consultant.
Makes sense.
Okay. Katie, you want to comment on that, or?
I just wanted to add that we are moving forward probably in September to do our greenhouse gas emissions commuter survey of employees. So we will, as part of that, have a better understanding of the number of people commuting to the various departments so that we can, know how many at least employee cars might be using the parking lot on how many days.
Appreciate that. My thought on it is that it would seem fairly easy for current departments like the Office of Aging to start tracking how many people visit them every day. So that would be something that wouldn't be complicated to do. But and plus workforce, and there's a lot of people, so. Since you're right here, Megan, and we had on the agenda the State Historic Preservation Update, do you have any comments on that other than you've already made, or?
Yeah, I think from their perspective, the kind of preliminary consultation part is complete. Like, they've told us what they know about the properties we would potentially impact. And so they understand, you know, we had communicated that we're working on getting our design team in place. And normally, you know, kind of the full consultation doesn't happen until we actually have a more concrete building project to present to them, and a design team that can provide that professional expertise where we're laying out, like, we've looked at the alternatives and, you know, explained to them what is and isn't viable, and had kind of our back and forth with them. So they're essentially waiting on us to be ready to continue that process with that design team. I had asked if they had a great, you know, like, easy handout, infographic, something to help explain the process. For those of us that really haven't been involved, you know, we don't tend to be involved with their office a whole lot since we don't build much as a county. They didn't have anything elegant like that, but they did provide, I think, you know, a little bit more detail on what's typical with alternatives analysis that I think will be helpful when we have our design team on board, because I expect, given what we had in our RFQ and our selection process, that team will include, you know, kind of the preservation expertise that we need, you know, up to the standards that the SHPO expects, and that, you know, we can let them know, like, this is how far we've gotten, and this is what the SHPO's office is looking for in the examination of alternatives. So.
Anybody have any questions, or Rich?
Yeah, after our last meeting, I had a conversation with Susan Holland, and she'd said something about a 60-day time period. And I thought she'd said sometime like towards mid-end of July that SHPO would be able to respond to us. It sounds like they can't do anything until we get our architecture team on board, and so we're talking sometime in the fall.
So I think the timeline, it's not really their timeline, it was ours. And so they completed their initial, you know, kind of review in under 30 days, which is their goal. And so we sort of have the ticket, you know, so to speak, open in their system. So as soon as we start to have design plans, we start to have alternatives analysis, those sorts of things, we can start uploading that information. And, you know, when we're ready to trigger kind of the next stage of consultation, there are timelines for that. It's really, they're waiting on us at this point. So it's
right.
Depending on our timeline.
But if we're not getting an architect till sometime in the fall, it sounds like this process won't proceed until after that. Correct?
I think that'd be correct, because we're going to want our professional team to have analyzed the alternatives.
Yeah, I agree with Rich. This is going to delay that process. Is it appropriate for the county to request SHPOs to say, we believe these two buildings, Building C, the annex, and the lofts building, that we want to take them down. And we don't believe that they are contributing to any value to the district. I think that the sticking point, I think this was shared with Historic District as well, that the building they were most interested in was the bank building. And all those things cause additional cost and issues with us, including just access. So is it appropriate to ask them or not until we get all this process done, which could be easily a year from now?
I would say that I think we are standing on weak footing if we try to do that without having a more solid idea of our project with our team, because it's going to be harder for us to argue that, you know, if demolition seems to be the only choice, when we don't have professionals that have looked at what we're trying to accomplish in the building program, looked at these buildings and really evaluated, like, is there a way to reuse any of these buildings or facades of these buildings or other pieces of these? And really that process is we're going back to them with the alternatives in order of feasibility. And there is a high bar for demolishing a historic resource. So that process isn't about arguing, we think they're contributing, they think, or we think they're non-contributing, they think they're not. You know, they've pretty much established what at the state level they believe, you know, kind of the importance of these buildings to be. And next, they're going to wait for us to bring forward a more, you know, realistic, what is our building? What are we trying to do? And why we can or cannot use some or all of these buildings in some way. And I'll just say, when demolition is proposed, you know, they expect an existing conditions assessment. To some extent, we've got, you know, that in place, and the work that's already being done on some of the buildings with the Park Service historian that was mentioned last time. But they expect, you know, a narrative summary of our recommendations in order of feasibility. So if it really looks like demolition is the most feasible option, we may lead with that and then explain the lower orders of feasibility for those other options. And we'll have evaluated, you know, kind of the features of the building, their systems, all of those things. But we would really benefit in that process from having, you know, the architects, the engineers, all of that. So it's not just based off of staff that, you know, I will say, I'm not involved in building projects all the time, so I don't think we're bringing that kind of that gravitas and credentials, you know, to that back and forth. So I think we do want to have the strongest team behind, you know, us in terms of looking at what our alternatives really are. And if we don't agree, you know, right off the bat, which one is the most feasible, that we can ask each other questions, because that's what it is. It's a consultation, so we're working back and forth. And they've offered to come here when we're ready, you know, to do an in-person visit and really understand these buildings and things. So
let's give them a tour.
They're invited at any time. Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Any questions for Megan at all? Anybody? All right, moving right along. There's only one last thing on the agenda, and it was the parking plan for 400 Tioga Street parking plan, and a copy of that was put on your desk, was also emailed. And I'll just, Arel, if you wouldn't mind just letting us know what your thoughts are on this and what your plans for completing this.
Well, so my understanding was just how currently the lot is used for parking. So what I've shown there is where the cars are parking, or at least kind of maximum capacity, which is 60. If you've been there, as you come into the lot on the right where the Baker building used to sit, we've marked out on the gravel the parking spots. I think there's like 24 there. And then as you go further in along the left side, which is behind the red house, there's additional parking. Those two areas where most employees are parking now. As you go further back alongside where INHS property is, or will be, I don't think we've closed yet, or very soon, that's the worst area. I mean, there's dirt, potholes, some gravel, if you want to call it that, but really those first two areas are the best. Now that back area on the right, once INHS closes with us on that property, they're going to want that area for staging, which we agreed to. And so that's where they're going to have materials, equipment. So really that's going to be off limits. So it's really those first two areas, the 24, and I think there's 16 or 14 to the left for parking. So I was just showing what the existing capacity, no improvements. We're not looking at making any improvements beyond what we've already done, which when we deconstructed the Baker Dental building, we put gravel and then we put millings on top of that. That's why it's stabilized so well. And that's why we were able to paint it. But beyond that, we're not looking at making any other improvements. I've indicated to this committee before that since it'll be used for staging for INHS, there's going to be a lot of traffic, heavy traffic through there. It doesn't make sense to invest in making improvements and then use it for staging for NHS, but then also for center of government, that will be the staging area as well. So those improvements, if any, that we would do would be after the center of government building is occupied, which is, it's 2028. So it's sometime down the road. So at this point, it was just showing kind of the existing parking layout.
Rich?
Is there any news from INHS on their timeline? It seems like that kept getting pushed back.
Yeah, I think we are, we're in the home stretches here. There's some, and Norma's been involved in the transaction. There's some paperwork back and forth that we're still in the middle of, but we're closing in.
Has the property been transferred or not yet?
No. But we are in the, hopefully the home stretch.
Okay. And any word from INHS when they would want to break ground? Are they waiting for interest rate changes or?
I don't have that
Okay.
that information fresh. Rather than, I'd rather get you the accurate information.
Thanks.
Mike?
At that point, I'd be glad to have it back.
Yeah.
My other point is two questions. If INHS is going to build, I understand about construction, but shouldn't we have a concrete walk through the right-of-way there to Sears Street?
We will at some point. I guess you just let us know when.
I'm thinking sooner rather than later. But I understand you don't want it driven over by machines and things, but I do think that ought to be there for the safety of the employees. And the other question I had, now that we have a line for the Red House on the north, can you put parallel park 3 or 4 parking spots there?
No, because then it would block access into the lot.
No, I'm not talking about drive-in. I'm talking about, like next to the courthouse over here, we have about 3 spots where you just are parallel with the line.
But you're saying right as the entrance?
Yeah, I think he means here.
Yeah, that would be too narrow. There wouldn't be enough to allow access because of the curb cut on Tioga Street. Basically, we've tried to maintain that curb cut distance there.
Okay, just a suggestion, that's all. Oh, and by the way, I don't know who the surveyor was, but they ought to know that there is no such thing as South Cascadilla Street. That's Cascadilla Avenue.
Deborah?
So I don't mean to catastrophize, but this thing with INHS has really been a protracted process for reasons I don't understand. And I know that we said they could use that back lot for a staging area, but at the rate they're going, there's the possibility that they would be working on their construction at the same time that we're starting the center of government. So what happens then? Who gets priority? How committed are we to accommodating their needs over our own?
So I believe we, in the contract documents with INHS, we put forward the, and again, I'm going to have to review to make sure the wording that we put in terms of their right to use our property for staging and the county needs. So I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, because I think assumptions were made about that timeline, and they have gone way over it.
The timeline was due to their going through the city process for subdivision. And that is now complete, and we are waiting now on the abstract to finalize the transaction and the sale.
Okay.
Okay, anybody have anything else they want to share or discuss?
Minutes?
We have minutes.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Can somebody approve the minutes from our last meeting?
I'll
Veronica,
move them.
Any
Or
moves
you
it?
can.
Veronica seconds. All in favor? Thank you. I think that concludes our business. We're adjourned.
Good meeting, Rita.
Thank you.